Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire is listener-supported independent media. Please pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or do one-time donations via PayPal, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. You can find these links on our website, aroundtheempire.com. Scott Horton joins us from Texas to talk about the withdrawal of troops from Syria and Afghanistan. Scott and I offer some cautiously optimistic analysis on Trump's latest actions on war and foreign policy, and how he could use a Horton's rule strategy to his advantage, outflanking left and right opponents with detente and de-escalation. Is there an only Nixon could go to China opportunity for Trump, and will he deliver on it? We also discuss the dilemma that establishment Democrats have created for themselves as they assume a twisted political opposition to scaling down wars and now routinely provide unquestioning fealty to the national security state. Lastly, we review William Atkin's dissenting farewell memo to NBC and the media's passive acceptance and cheerleading of perpetual war. Scott is the author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. He's the managing director of Libertarian Institute, the opinion editor at antiwar.com, host of Anti-War Radio on Pacifica, and the host of the Scott Horton Show podcast. Scott has spent the past 2 decades giving voice to ardent anti-war and anti-interventionist activists, experts, and reporters from across the spectrum, and has done nearly 5,000 interviews. This interview was recorded on January 3rd, 2019. Hi, Scott. Happy New Year. Thanks for coming on the show.
Happy New Year to you, too. Thanks for having me.
So I can't remember which interview it was or which podcast, but I'm pretty sure it's a number of times you've mentioned that what you thought was Trump's best strategy was to declare victory and lead these wars that he didn't start. And I remember a lengthy interview where you talked about a strategy of, attacking from the left, basically, on foreign policy and war policy. So am I accurately describing how you...
Yeah, well, typically, in fact, they call this, Michael Bolden at the 10th Amendment Center has coined this as the Horton rule, which is for libertarians like us. My philosophy is, and I learned this driving a cab really, back, decades previous, is that, a real libertarian is always more right-wing than a right-winger and more left-wing than a left-winger on the things that they're good on. So nobody wants to deregulate like I do, and nobody wants to lower taxes, abolish all taxes like I do, and no one wants hard money as bad as I do. And so when it comes to arguing economics with a right-winger, I can paint a right-winger basically as a profligate, spending, big government socialist type compared to myself. So how do they justify it? And then, of course, I'm for completely abolishing all prisons and police forces in the country immediately. For example, as one thing that I would, where I outflank the left on the left. And so it doesn't make sense to argue against the right from the left or against the left from the right when that just, reinforces pre-existing prejudices and makes people kind of batten down the hatches and, steel themselves to fight. Why not, outflank them from their own position and get them to be even better? Like I would argue to a communist, essentially, and a lot of my friends are communists because they're good on war. They're like, if you really want to wither the state away, don't you need to really wither the state away instead of this whole thing about creating a dictatorship of the proletariat first? Like, let's just get rid of the thing. Let's get from here to anarchy and see how things work out after that. I think, things would be a little bit different than a lot of leftists think it would be. But I'm with him on the abolish the state part. Let's stick with that. So when it comes to war, I think there's obviously a great conservative case against American empire, a constitutionalist case, George Washingtonian case against it, a Jeffersonian case against it, a Robert Taftian case against it, that, war leads to big government, to centralized authority and income taxation, regulation and regimentation in the economy, corruption of the market system, with all kinds of crony capitalism, where the Pentagon budget is the biggest honeypot in the history of the world. There's never been anything like it. And so you have such a corruption. The great deformation is what David Stockman calls it. He's Ronald Reagan's former budget director, and says that the entire post-World War II American empire you can picture as a massive government-created distortion in the free economy and the natural order of things, and the way things will be, which just means there's a big correction coming. And so for Donald Trump, the best thing to do then is, because he really doesn't believe in the so-called liberal world order, which is just the euphemism for the American empire. He really doesn't believe in it. He doesn't believe in the good of it. He looks at it from a nationalist point of view, not from a libertarian point of view or an individualist point of view, but from an American nationalist and patriot point of view, as a giant waste of money on a giant cockamamie scheme to remake the whole world, when that's completely ridiculous. And the fact of the matter is, resources are scarce in this world. And the American people, the middle part of North America, 300 million out of 7 billion people on the planet, we just can't afford to rule the rest. The whole thing makes no sense. So the best thing for him to do is what he does sometimes when he isn't doing the opposite, which is praise the troops to high heaven and bring them home. And order the ends of these interventions that he sees as, completely ridiculous. And listen, here's a true statement by Donald Trump. People say this guy is such a liar. All he does is lie, and all he does is lie. He's such a liar, they catch him in 50 lies a day. It's probably true that they do. But here's something he said that was true. That going into the Middle East, not just the invasion of Iraq, but just America's entire 21st century project in the Middle East, is the worst possible thing that we could have done. That George Bush made the greatest strategic mistake in America, disaster, created the worst consequences for Americans of any president. I mean, that's really not true if, you throw in Vietnam and, especially World War I. There's been some other major problems. But still, to compare it to that is essentially correct. And I think, as you understand, Joanne, George Bush giving Baghdad, fighting a civil war and making that an almost entirely super duper majority, 90% super majority Shiite city, means that he essentially created the circumstances for further conflict for the rest of our lifetimes. That just like Woodrow Wilson's intervention in World War I, that this thing isn't over yet, and it's not going to be over yet, because of the drastic changes that have taken place on the ground there because of American intervention in this century. And so Trump is, taking exactly the right stand when he says that this isn't his fault, that he just got here. He's not married to Bill Clinton, and he's not the brother of George Bush, and he was not Obama's Secretary of State, and this is not his fault. He wasn't even a governor or a senator. I guess I should have said he wasn't even a senator who could have voted on it, much less, I don't know what the hell, you know what I mean? A governor who would have had no say in it, but at least was in power, was something you could call the establishment, right? Yeah. He was just some raving kook TV star, former, real estate monger, right? He was, and so he could, and I say this in the book, he could simply just come in and say, this is all big dummy George Bush and weak loser Barack Obama's fault, not my fault. And the perfumed prince, David Petraeus, and the warrior monk, tough guy, James Mattis, they couldn't solve it either. So And then as he phrased it, and this is perfectly correct. I mean, you could say he's being cynical, but I don't really think so. I think, if you waterboarded the guy, he really does, feel this way about American soldiers, the way American patriots are supposed to, right, to hold them up to such high esteem. And the way he put it to Lindsey Graham when Graham attacked him over withdrawing from Syria was, I guess you don't care about the young American soldiers' lives like I do. In one fell swoop, the President of the United States, in a tweet, finally turning the support the troops meme on its head, where it belongs.
Yeah, because
we support the troops. We want to bring them home safely. You're the ones who act like their lives are a dime a dozen and can be spent on all these crazy social engineering projects in other people's countries where we don't belong. And blam. I mean, and that's huge. That's right. That's like the body slam from the Ultimate Warrior or whatever. That is, you're done. And it was the President of the United States that said that. Yeah, the President of the United States says, I want to bring them home safe. You want to get them killed? And that was what he said in his press conference yesterday at the cabinet meeting was, I go to Walter Reed and I see these guys and I just don't want to see any more. I don't want to see any more of our soldiers hurt for no good reason. Now, that's what George Bush should have said.
It's what Obama should have said.
That's what Obama should have said. And, Donald Trump is rogue enough that, hey, he essentially feels that way, and he doesn't give a damn about using it against his political enemies, right? I mean, look at who we're talking about here. He essentially accused Jeb Bush of having erectile dysfunction in order to become the president of the United States, which is, beyond the pale. You're not supposed to do that. Right? How can this guy be our alpha leader if he can't even please his wife, is essentially what Trump was saying. And it worked, and he won. So he's not the kind of guy who's going to figure out a way to hold his tongue or to rephrase it. I mean, he'll go ahead and say it. And I've been wanting for people to use that against Lindsey Graham this whole time. Why does Lindsey Graham hate American soldiers so much? And he acts like they're just little plastic toys on his risk board. When, well, it's
because
not like
you're
you
going
can
to have
say that it's for a good cause, because it's not.
Well, the reason they don't, Scott, the reason they don't is because you're going to have this whole machine come down on you. But that already happened with Trump, so he's gotten used to it.
And here's the thing: the soldiers like him. The soldiers appreciate it. Ron Paul. Look, before Ron Paul, in 2005. A poll of the Army said that 3/4 of them wanted to come home right then, that they didn't believe in the mission anymore. They thought I bet you by 2/3 or 3/4 super majorities, the enlisted men in 2003 believed that they were attacking Iraq because Iraq had been involved in the 9/11 plot or was allies with Osama bin Laden anyway, and that was close enough, right? By 2005, they didn't even care if that was true anymore. By 2005, they're like, what are we doing here anymore? But that was 13 years ago, 14. Well, it was December, so 13 years ago.
So it's ridiculous.
And, Ron Paul got more donations from active duty and veterans, officers and enlisted, than all other candidates combined in 2008 and 12. And that's because he's an anti-war Republican. He wasn't saying you have to become a liberal to be anti-war. He was saying you can keep your identity, but you can change your mind on this policy. And people did by the millions. And, that was a decade ago now. So the right wing is ready for this message. By far, they're ready.
Well, I mean, the left wing should be too, except some weird contortionist happened, this Trump mania. But, Obama had a mandate, in my view, to get out of Iraq. And he certainly, of course, he was clever in the way he did it, but he came across as the guy he ran as the guy who didn't vote for the Iraq war. And he was a peace candidate. And he had a mandate, a massive mandate. And, that didn't happen. He did kind of get out of Iraq, but, now we're back. Yeah, we're back. So I'm going to play these clips just to refresh our memory and so the audience can hear the clips that we're talking about. let's start with the Syria clip.
Okay, yeah, please, Jeff.
You used the word slowly when you were describing the withdrawal from
Yeah, I never said fast or slow.
What's your timetable? When do you want troops to be out?
I know somebody said 4 months, but I didn't say that either. I'm getting out. We're getting out of Syria. Look, we don't want Syria. Obama gave up Syria years ago when he didn't violate the red line. I did when I shot 59 missiles in, but that was a long time later. And when President Obama decided not to violate his statement that never crossed the red line, and then they did, and he didn't do anything about it. You know, making a threat is okay, but you always have to follow through with the threat. If you're going to make that threat, you can't make a threat and then do nothing. So Syria was lost long ago. It was lost long ago. And besides that, we're talking about sand and death. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, vast wealth. We're talking about sand and death. Now, the Kurds, it's very interesting. Turkey doesn't like them. Other people do. I didn't like the fact that they're selling the small oil that they have to Iran. And we asked them not to sell it to Iran. But the Kurds, our partners, are selling oil to Iran. We're not thrilled about that. Okay? I'm not happy about it at all. At the same time, they fight better when we fight with them. When we send 30 F-18s in front of them, they fight much better than they do when we don't. And you've seen what's happened. But we want to protect the Kurds, nevertheless. We want to protect the Kurds. But I don't want to be in Syria forever. It's sand, and it's death. And when we kill ISIS, if we don't, now everyone says, then they'll come to our country. Well, that's possibly true, a very small percentage. But you know where else they're going? To Iran, who hates ISIS more than we do. They're going to Russia, who hates ISIS more than we do. So we're killing. And then I read when we pull out, Russia's thrilled. Russia's not happy. You know why they're not happy? Because they like it when we're killing ISIS, because we're killing them for them. And we're killing them for Assad. And we're killing ISIS also for Iran.
Say though on the timetable for withdrawing troops, do you think it's?
I think it's just over a period of time, but we're withdrawing, but we're hitting them. We're hitting them very hard. When I met with the generals in Iraq, I said to a couple of the generals, I said, "Why didn't you do this before?" He said, "Sir, our commanders were telling us what to do." I said, "Well, don't you tell them?" "No, sir, we take orders," and they do. They're great soldiers. They listen. I do it differently. I sat around, and after a few minutes, they loosened up, and they said, "This is what we should do." But we were supposed to be out of Syria many years ago. If you remember, we went to Syria for some spot hits, and that was 5 years ago, and we never left. I don't want to be in Syria. I go to Walter Reed Hospital, and I see soldiers that are so badly injured and hurt. I don't want that. I don't want it. And I want to rebuild our country. And I want to spend money on our military without depleting it every day. I want to spend money on our country. And that's what's happening. And our military is getting really strong. I could tell you stories when I first got here about our military that I don't even want to talk about. We'll look at the reports. Nobody more critical of, hey, it's not my fault. I didn't put us there. But we're getting out, and we're getting out smart, and we're winning. We're winning, okay? But just to answer your question, over a period of time, I never said I'm getting out tomorrow. I said we're pulling our soldiers out, and they will be pulled back in Syria, and then we're getting out of Syria. Yeah, absolutely. But we're getting out very powerfully.
So I have to say that a few weeks ago, I thought that he had been completely co-opted and was not going to follow through on his foreign policy, what seemed kind of genuine in his foreign policy, like probably the only thing I agree with him on. And, but he was reversed a couple of times on Syria. And, I started seeing all the people say, he was just lying all along. He never meant that. He was just lying to get into office and saying what Bannon told him to say. And I started thinking, maybe I was just totally wrong about that. But then I hear this, and I I mean, there's a lot of detritus in there too, right? Which I just
Yeah.
ignore.
Well,
But
look, okay, specifics in a second, but just as far as the overall kind of point of view here is, he's a right-wing nationalist. And there are a lot of differences between a right-wing nationalist and the typical neoliberal and neoconservative centrist imperialists. I mean, even the neocons were pretty right-wing on issues of, international cooperation and all this. I mean, all the never-Trumpers now say, oh, don't forsake our allies, but they were the ones who called our allies old Europe for getting in the way of Iraq War II, right? And bypassed the United Nations. Same thing for the Kosovo War. Just went ahead and used NATO there, the coalition of the willing in Iraq War II. But
he busts
for the
that up
most part,
pretty good too, though. He busts up the whole issue of the coalitions in another clip.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so he, essentially it's not that he has any kind of Ron Paulian philosophy of non-intervention.
Right.
Right. It's simply that he doesn't have a really a philosophy that he believes in probably at all about this, so much as he doesn't believe in the S that they're constantly shoveling about how this is all about spreading democracy, and that, as the neocons put it with Iraq War II, you're right. This isn't in our national interest. This isn't for us. That's the proof of what a benevolent, wonderful project that it is. That America is so good that we start wars at our own expense just to help you. Just because we care so much about human rights, we're going to free you from the tyranny of Saddam Hussein. This kind of thing. He just doesn't believe in that.
No.
Right? This is just like the right-wing opposition to Obama's red line and the attack on Syria in 2013. Was the narrative essentially at Bannon's Breitbart was, screw the Syrians. We don't care enough about them to bomb them for their own good. We don't care if Assad gasses them all. That is essentially, like the crudest take on right-wing non-interventionism. That, and it doesn't have to be so crude that we don't care what happens to those people. But the point is that the American government doesn't have the mandate of setting everything right in the world, which, as you know, is a huge part of – it's not just, Joanne, it's not just propaganda. It's a huge part of the self-justification by the members of the American War Party about what it is that they do in the world. Yeah. And it is cynical, and their money does depend on it. And don't get me wrong, but it's the same phenomenon as the British talking about, well, look, we gave the Indians a parliament and judges with black robes, whereas before they had these more primitive tribal systems or something. Well, okay. I mean,
yeah,
right. The Romans built their aqueducts, and there's positive externalities. Doesn't mean it's worth it or anything, but
yeah.
And so he just doesn't believe in that. That sales pitch that we have to do this in order to help the rest of the world. It just didn't stick on him. He's too right-wing for that in that sense, right? Like if he was really more, if he was an arms dealer instead of a building monger, right? Then he would probably see things much differently. As it is, he's really into all the arms sales stuff and seems to think our economy really depends on it, which it really does not. But
well, and he sees the hollowing out of America, and he sees, the infrastructure problem. He sees the state of the union per se. He sees it more clearly. Nobody else seems to really care about that, or they just, give it lip service. But he's made the point over and over again that we should be investing here. And I think he really believes that.
Yeah. And I mean, after all, think of how horrible and wasteful all of this has been.
Oh my God. Yeah.
They didn't set the people of Iraq free at all, right? They destroyed everything, and at the expense of trillions of dollars, and not just the trillions of dollars, but also the massive boom and bust of the business cycle, so-called business cycle, the government fake money boom and bust cycle that comes from these artificially low interest rates, which the Federal Reserve sets to basically create an artificial boom in prosperity and to make it cheaper for the government to borrow money and to make the war seem free. Remember George Bush even sent those rebates in the mail where everybody got $200 or $300 2 years in a row there. They made it seem like it was your dividend check, that every American was getting a $200 or $300 share of the profits of the Iraq war, right? When in fact it was all at their expense. It was all their money. It was all a big, scam. But then later, when some guy's blowing his brains out, because the economy crashed and completely destroyed everything that he worked his entire life to build, he doesn't realize that, oh, this is my share of the cost for Iraq War II. That's why. And that's a serious thing, the suicides. All those bankruptcies come with divorces and suicides and foster care and just horrible social consequences from the dislocations that come with these massive crashes we suffer every 10 years or so. That is the cost of avoiding raising the money for the wars. Can you imagine if they said, buy war bonds, and everyone had to be somehow induced to buying government debt to pay for all these wars, $6 trillion worth? You think they would be able to raise it? Of course not. If they were to raise our taxes to pay for it up front, there'd be a revolt.
And
instead, we suffer the boom bust, but the people don't understand the reason why is to pay for the wars.
Yeah, and the same goes for the draft. If you really had to sacrifice anything for these wars, I mean, this is why the media keeps it pretty much out of sight, out of mind, too. I mean, everyone knows that there's no real support for any kind of a war. Yeah, so I don't know. I thought he made a few points in there that sounded genuine. So I'm back to thinking, yeah, he did mean the things that he said, at least some of them. And one of the things that I thought was smart was him saying, I didn't get us into this. So
right.
It wasn't his war to begin with, and he hasn't bought into it, even though he, flew the missiles in there, which is just a ridiculous thing to do to begin with. And he's saying there's nothing there. There's nothing there that we want. So, and I guess I do believe him, several of the things he said, including the part, as you mentioned earlier, getting a firsthand look at what it's doing to troops when he goes to Walter Reed.
Yeah.
And of course, he knows that, I'm not sure the exact number, but it's somewhere between 20 and 30 suicides per day. I think that's where we are now.
I mean, that's what they say, 21 or something. I don't know about those numbers. I really should look into that further. And that includes older guys too.
But even if it's one.
It is, it used to be that the military had a lower suicide rate than the general population by quite a bit, but that is no longer the case. And you're right that's something that they just don't want to face up to. And you know what? I mean, I hate to rub this in, but what the hell, man? It's true. And it's really a thing that at one point, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who's now the leader of al-Qaeda, I think at the time Osama was still alive, but, he was Osama bin Laden's partner, the former leader of Egyptian Islamic Jihad. And he put out a podcast saying, my guys, when they commit suicide, they're giving their lives in defense of their beliefs and their family and their people. Your guys kill themselves out of despair that you use them up and throw them away. You're sick. And it's like, dude, not that he's right about the glory of the way that he sends his men to kill themselves in battle. But man, to be shamed like that about American military suicides by Ayman al-Zawahiri and him being that correct that you have to say damn and admit it, it's pretty shameful, that he would be in any position to moralize against us after all that he's responsible for, mass atrocities against civilians all over the world. But then, who are we to talk? In most of those conflicts, his guys are only fighting on battlefields that the Americans have made for them in Iraq, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq again. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so as much as the guy, as I don't care for this guy and have never, Trump is not a new phenomena, right? He's been around these parts,
right?
For as long as I can remember. Right. And I never liked the guy. I don't even like doing this, like, you have to do this disclaimer. Oh, I don't like Trump, or I didn't vote for Trump. But, I don't like even having to do the disclaimers. I've been very open from the start that some of his foreign policy I thought was the right thing to do. And I still do. So The thing is, though, that now I just completely lost my train of thought. What I was going to say. See, by doing my disclaimer thing, I forgot what point I was going to make. Oh shit. I'll just start a new topic on because I do want to cover the
Well, here, I'll jump in. This isn't exactly a disclaimer, but the thing is, too, is, he inherited 7 or 8 wars. And we're now 2 years into his presidency, and he hasn't ended any of them yet. And he, in fact, escalated all of the wars and reduced the rules of engagement, delegated authority as far down the chain of command as he can, loosening the restrictions on when strikes are called in. So this is seen in 2017 and 18, record numbers of airstrikes and civilian casualties in the Afghan war. The highest numbers of the whole war, or at least since the height of the surge in 2011 and 12. He has started bombing Pakistan again. He's escalated both sides of the war in Yemen for and against al-Qaeda and the Houthis there. He's put even infantry on the ground, escalating the war in Somalia, drone strikes and special operations forces in Libya. And he did finish Iraq War III, which was, Obama's cleaning up of the blowback from his support al-Qaeda to overthrow Assad policy from a couple of years before that. But so he is responsible for tens of thousands of civilian deaths, maybe hundreds of thousands, if you include everybody dying in the Yemen war in the last couple of years in this. So he's a war criminal and belongs in the supermax right there with George Bush and Barack Obama. He could have ended all of this on the first day. And, Yemen is the very worst one of them. And the easiest, really, for him to just call off all American participation in the thing, and it would end immediately. He could order the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to end that war, and it would be over tomorrow morning. And he has not done that yet. So, I never liked the guy either. I mean, frankly, I remember when he went bankrupt in the early 90s thinking it was hilarious because I always thought that, he was a Ferrari driving, fake tits girlfriend having yuppie prick, I don't. Yeah, he was a symbol of well, never mind what he's a symbol of. I just, he's Donald Trump, for Christ's sake. And you know what, though? I'll tell you when I knew he was going to win was when I read that the TV show The Apprentice, which I admit I just haven't watched primetime TV since I was a little kid, Yeah,
I don't
I just didn't know this. But that show was on for 14 years. And I said, oh, forget it. Oh, he's going to win, dude. Hillary Clinton might be the most famous woman in the world, but that is Michael Jackson level superstardom right there, Donald Trump. You can't beat that, He is super, honestly, whatever, Elizabeth Taylor, whoever, the superstars, the biggest of them. That's how famous he is. And that's how much we all know who he is. And it just goes to show, right? And you listen to his talk at the press conference at the cabinet meeting yesterday, and he goes on and on. I gave Mattis $700 billion. Then I gave him $715 billion more. And, oh, man, and just like in the clip you played, oh, I bombed Syria. Obama, he didn't bomb Syria. I'm the one who bombed him. And so, we're gonna bomb this out of ISIS and all those things. This is he's just as happy to escalate and commit war crimes as he is to wrap the things up, right? He doesn't believe in peace. He just doesn't believe in the justifications for the war. But if it's politically expedient, he's perfectly happy to do the wrong thing. So it's really unfortunate. He just doesn't have the depth, right? Like we can celebrate that he's a curmudgeon enough, in a sense, that he's an ornery, rich old golfer enough that he can't stretch his imagination to believe in the garbage that they're peddling over at the Center for a New American Security about the preservation of the liberal world order and all of this stuff. It's just nonsense, right? He don't buy it. But there's a huge gap between that and really doing the right thing. That's why I always try to emphasize, and this goes to actually part of your original question for me at the beginning, was about attacking the left from the left now. So if Donald Trump can use the Horton strategy and attacking the left from the left, that would be, the best move for him, politically speaking, the art of the deal for him. What if he went ahead and ended a war every couple of months from now until 2020's election, which he's got enough. He could do that, right? Every 3 months, every quarter, announce the end of another war. And then right around election time, he's Trump the Great. He ended the entire terror war of, stupid George Bush and weak loser Obama. And the soldiers love him because he saved their lives. And he can brag the whole time. He can brag about and with a straight face, because he is Donald Trump. This fits his character perfectly, to just say, listen, these soldiers, these enlisted men are the bravest heroes who ever breathed. They are the most wonderful people in the history of humanity, and that's why we're ending the wars, to bring them home. He could do that. Like, even Ron Paul couldn't do that. That Ron Paul was kind of it just wouldn't sound quite right. But Trump can phrase it that way, right? These are the greatest heroes who have ever existed, and that's why we're ending all the wars today, to save their lives and bring them home, and so they can just get, free stuff without having to do anything at all. Fine. That's the best way to do it. And he could do that. And then what are the liberals going to do? They're already trapped. You mentioned it. They're already trapped. We can talk about the William Atkin thing, but we've seen for 2 years straight now where the entire center left has rallied to the CIA, the FBI, the military, the permanent national security state overlords to protect us from the elected president of the United States. And it has just twisted them in knots. And so, but the thing is, regular humans and, real, movement progressives and leftists, they don't believe in that. And they don't like Donald Trump, but they like getting out of Syria. And you can't talk them out of that because they're just not that bad of pushovers, And so if Donald Trump, it's not like they're going to vote for Trump, but if he ends all the wars and forces the Democratic Party to run as the party of the CIA and the Pentagon, who promised to reinvade Syria or whatever crazy thing they're trying to do to attack, force them to attack him from the right on the wars, would be the ultimate judo. And then the Democrats will stay home, and that's how to win in 2020. And I always try to push it that way, so that this is all about him. It's all about his political interests. It's all about, what do the people want to hear? They want to hear this. And if you think that this is why you beat Hillary, you're damn right it is. And this is the only way you're going to beat, whoever the Democrats nominate next time, is comparing them to George W. Bush with a joke, Yeah,
and I don't think people, and I guess I can't prove this with any numbers, but I really don't think people put enough emphasis on his foreign policy and war stance for getting him elected, and how it worked against Hillary Clinton. I really don't think they emphasize that enough, but I'm completely convinced that it played a big role. And I guess the point I was going to make earlier was, like, even if you hate this guy, if you cannot stand this guy, he is in a unique position to end these wars. And who else can do that? Who else can do it?
And here's some examples too. Nixon and Kissinger made friends with Mao Zedong. Not just the worst communist, but actually, quite literally, the worst person that ever lived. The worst political leader ever. Worse than Genghis Khan or Tamerlane or anybody. Pope, whichever pope you got, he was the worst ever. Killed 40 million people. And Nixon was like, how do you do? You know what we're going to do? We're going to figure out how to get along.
Yeah.
And that was the hugest ice to break. And it took until Jimmy Carter, through Jimmy Carter, to finally recognize China. And this has done so much for peace. And at the time, Nixon was ruthlessly attacked for it by the right. And ever since then, it's been known as his greatest achievement in his life. Ronald Reagan, who came into power as a hawk, spent his second term negotiating with Mikhail Gorbachev, getting rid of nuclear weapons, giving Gorbachev every reason to trust him while he's implementing glasnost and perestroika and ultimately dissolving the Soviet Union and resigning from power there. And Reagan and Bush Sr. both, the two of them combined, reduced hydrogen bomb stocks on the planet from, I think, 60-something thousand down to, around 10 or 14. and completely demobilized all their nuclear weapons in Europe and all of this stuff. Pulled all the nukes out of South Korea. I mean, and George Bush, he ran, and this is part of how he beat Al Gore, was by portraying Bill Clinton and Al Gore as reckless interventionists around the world. We don't want to do that, man. We're not trying to intervene and tell everybody else how to live. We should be a humble nation or they'll resent us, Bush said. And that was part of his winning strategy against Al Gore. And then Kerry, of course, was too much of a coward to run against Bush and the Iraq War. He just ran to be a more competent George Bush. So that was a failed test of the strategy there. We might as well stick with the warmonger we got at that point, was, the way that tilted. But then Obama beat Hillary and McCain and Romney because he was the least, warmonger candidate in those two elections, a primary and election of 2008 and the election of 2012 there. And so, this is, as Ron Paul says, the peace candidate always wins the general election. And then from being a Republican especially, that means, and it's a unique circumstance in this case because they have this whole thing about this narrative about him being a pro-Russian traitor and all that, which it really does detract from this. But I still think that it works, that it's much easier for a Republican to say, for example, if he, struck a new deal with Iran, or if he even went to Tehran and met with the Ayatollah or met with the Iranian president.
He hinted at that yesterday too, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, and in fact, he has said this numerous times that, they'll come around when they're not ready to negotiate yet, but sooner or later they will. I mean, he does not want a conflict with Iran. He just thinks he can get a better deal than that one. It started as just a campaign talking point. Then he had to triple down on it. So now he's got to try to come up with something. But
he still seems to be completely misinformed on Iran and Yemen.
Yes. I mean, he's surrounded by hawks, which actually, let's talk about that in just one second, who he's surrounded by. But all other things being equal, though, if he went to Tehran, no one would say, well, compare it to this. If Obama went to Tehran, they would say he's a Muslim, he's a communist, he's a terrorist, he's a traitor, he's a weakling, he's a liberal Democrat, he's feminine, he's surrendered to our enemies, right? But when it's Donald Trump, the big fake macho conservative Republican type, businessman, all that just doesn't fit, right? It just doesn't. If he makes a deal with the Ayatollah, nobody thinks that it's because he's a weak wimp pushover. If anything, they would think, wow, he's really strong enough that he overruled his whole national security cabinet and did the right thing anyway. Which makes him look tough. And this is what I always said about Obama before Trump ever came along. So it's not just the comparison. If Obama in 2009 had told Bob Gates and David Petraeus, you don't quit, you're fired, both of you, beat it, and then gave a speech about how he had soundly whooped John McCain's ass by 10 points because the American people wanted him and not Senator McCain to make these decisions, and that was why he was going to make the call he wanted, and if John McCain didn't like it, he could run for president again, and that's why we're pulling the troops out of Afghanistan rather than sending 70,000 more in, and how do you like that? He would have been seen as a great leader for doing that. He would have gained in points. Instead, he was afraid he would look weak, when in fact, if he had just been tough about being peaceful, he would have looked strong. I mean, he didn't have the wisdom to see that, because it was a purely political decision. The liberals and the left, they all love me so much, they're not going to care if I escalate the war. And he made a handshake deal. Rahm Emanuel made a deal with Lindsey Graham that if he sends at least another 60,000 troops, then he and John McCain will stop attacking him. So he was going to short circuit an attack from the right, and it wasn't really going to cost him anything on the left. So he went ahead and bowed down and gave in to a decision that he knew was wrong.
Yeah, I don't understand him at all. I mean,
that's no different than holding up an American GI as a human shield if somebody's shooting at you. Like, is that what you do? You know what I mean? Mm. Like, that was what he was doing. He was sacrificing their lives for his political future.
Yeah, well, and he, in my view, did that in other ways with other issues too, other than war. But I think he was fully aware of the mandate that he had. And he had not only a national mandate, he had a global mandate, that guy. I
Yeah.
call it the great squandering that he didn't do that. And for that reason, I really wonder whether he ever intended to scale down the wars. I
Nah,
have my
not
doubts
really.
about that. Yeah.
Nah. I mean, you know what? I mean, you remember in '08, there was Kucinich and Gravel, and then there was Obama, Hillary, and Edwards. And it was as simple as that. He was just Hillary in drag. That's all he ever was. He was never anything but Bill Clinton, up there to do for himself. And in other words, another part of being Bill Clinton means he knows how to read. He knows what he's doing. He's as guilty as hell. Where George Bush, you could on some level not forgive him, but understand that he was really impressed by all the literate people in his cabinet's arguments,
Yeah.
and didn't know what to do other than what they told him to do. You know what I mean? Because he was lost because he was so stupid.
He was
But
just
Obama's not
incompetent.
that stupid. Obama knows, and that makes him that much more guilty in a sense,
Yeah. He was a very competent man. I mean,
Yep.
maybe one of the most competent presidents we ever had.
And he really
So,
knew better. He really knew better in each of those things. I mean, he said about Libya that the decision to start it was 51-49,
oh my God.
which is just the same thing as saying, I'm a war criminal. I am guilty of starting an aggressive war when I had no good reason to do so. I mean,
Yeah.
he could have said 70-30, 60-40, but 51-49 to start a war. And
Yeah.
one where chaos reigns to this day, of course.
Yeah, I find it inexplicable. And I do think, though, that Obama was more influenced by European leaders than, of course, Trump is not. And yesterday he went off on a whole tear about his allies. I have that clip too. But I think that Obama definitely wanted to cooperate with the European leaders. And I think that, Britain and France had a lot to do with the Libya thing, especially France.
Right.
So I don't want to excuse him for it because that's one of the sticking points for me. And right from that very day, and the fact that they attacked Libya on March 19th, I just about lost it when that happened.
Yeah.
I don't.
Man, I'd
Was that a
forgotten about that, I
coincidence?
guess.
Was that a coincidence?
Yeah, no, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Don't tell me it's some crazy pagan holiday.
No, it's just the same as the Iraq War
Yeah.
invasion.
No,
Anyway.
I know that's what you meant, but I was just saying, don't tell me there's like some real deep reason behind
Oh
why
God,
both
I
of
don't.
those wars are on that day, I
Yeah,
was
I'm
just
not
joking,
into
though.
that kind of thing.
I
But
was just joking. David
So-
Icke jokes for the crowd. Hardy har. Here's a possibility right before us, and I was keeping my mouth shut. I really could have had this scoop a couple of weeks ago, but I didn't want to jinx it. But now it's in the New York Times, so what the hell? And that is that Trump is seriously looking at Jim Webb to be the
Yeah.
Secretary of
I
Defense.
just saw that today.
And that's a big deal because Jim Webb does not believe in any of this stuff either. Now, I'm not exactly sure how far he's willing to go or, whatever. I don't know the guy or anything like that. Never interviewed him. But, and in fact, he was bad on the Iran deal, but that's probably good for getting him the job.
Yeah.
But I know he does not believe in any of this American hegemony in the Middle East garbage. He just doesn't believe in it. And he's a Democrat and was very recently a senator. He wasn't defeated either. He just quit after one term because he hated it so much.
Well, he's a Democrat, but he's a Democrat from Virginia. So
Yeah, he is a conservative Democrat, a centrist Democrat. And he was a Republican, or I don't know if he was a partisan at all, but he was the Secretary of the Navy under Ronald Reagan. And I believe he is a Vietnam War veteran, although I forget now. I know his son is an Iraq War veteran. And so he is exactly the guy to stand at Trump's right flank and say, again, what Mattis was supposed to be, right? The right-wing tough guy that makes it okay to do peaceful things.
and a soldier.
Yeah. And so that should be the thing. That's what Jim Webb should be perfect for. And that should be the job interview is, look, Webb, I'm going to bring our troops home from everywhere. You're going to be the tough guy standing to my right, telling everybody that it's the right thing to do. None of these narratives about, Trump is overruling his whole establishment to do this. you're going to lead the Defense Department, and we're going to implement this policy, and they're going to like it, and it's going to be great, right? And then, right, boss, let's go to Tehran together and shake hands with the Ayatollah.
Huh.
Right? That should be the answer. That I mean, and you know what? You know, Rand Paul's a senator, and he wouldn't be a good Secretary of Defense anyway. I don't think he'd want that job, and that's not the right fit. He wants to be president one day. And leaving a senatorship is a bad idea for anything other than the presidency, if that's your thing. Although maybe one exception to that would be Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And then it's so obvious, too, that the man to replace John Bolton is Douglas McGregor, seen regularly on the Tucker Carlson show, saying, good job, Trump, for whenever Trump does something anti-war, says something anti-war. Then you got all of the Cato guys to staff the National Security Council, Doug Bandow and Ted Carpenter. And, you know, there are a few other guys at the National Interest magazine, I think, and the Cato Institute, who would be absolutely perfect to implement this policy. I mean, Doug Bandow is just the best. So if he was like Deputy National Security Advisor or something like that. So there's not that deep of a bench of people who are qualified, who lean right, you know, acceptable in those roles, but there are enough guys. There's like a solid half dozen guys, and that's what we need. And so if he gets Webb, you know, hopefully, presumably, it'll be, you know, because Webb is on that same list of decent dudes here. And, you know, hopefully he could get Walton Mearsheimer to do it. I don't know if they would or if he would ask them. I know that those guys wrote a book about the Israel lobby, which that may be asking too much. But anyway, there's a solid, like, you know, 6 or 10 dudes who could staff Donald Trump's national security positions at the highest levels and to implement an America First anti-war type policy. And that would come with its own risks, too, because, of course, you know, just like making the nuclear deal with Iran means having a genocidal war in Yemen, we could have, you know, pull out of the Middle East entirely and end up in a worse conflict with China because these guys need something to do. Only China's got H-bombs. So we really just can't have any of that, guys. And so, you know,
well, I mean, we did a whole Cold War.
But anyway, I'm not saying killing Arabs is worth it to keep us out of China or something like it. They're expendable or anything. But I'm just saying there could be a downside in Asia.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that my initial reaction to hearing that Webb might be his pick was positive. That I'd have to go back. I know there were a lot of things I didn't like about Jim Webb, but I'm pretty sure his foreign policy wasn't one of them. And he's another curmudgeon. He's not a go along to get along kind of guy.
Well, he opposed the Iraq War II surge, was where he, I think, really started making waves in 2007.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know, fingers crossed, because one of the things that the Foreign Policy Board did very well was to convince pretty much everybody that you should never go work for Trump. So that's one of the big things is, you know, can they get confirmed? And which, he should be able to do that, Jim Webb. Particularly
since he was a senator. Yeah. I mean, they basically, that would be very impolite and improper. I mean, it's the same thing with Hagel. They did not want to approve Hagel because the lobby said no to him. But at the end of the day, he's a senator. They had to approve him.
Yeah.
To be Secretary of Defense under Obama.
So maybe we do have a only Nixon could go to China moment here. And I'll take it. I don't know if it's enough to get him reelected. I'm going to try to ignore that circus for a while. But even if it's not enough to get him elected, it would be a legacy for him. He could, you know, he could brag about that. He could, you know, consider himself having done a great thing. And I think that's what motivates him most. But before I let you go, since you're my go-to guy on Afghanistan, and also, I mean, I guess I think I've told you this before. I'm sure I have. I mean, the reason why I'm doing this podcast, as, you know, amateur as I am, you inspired that. You and the War Nerd, basically two people who sort of inspired me to do what I'm doing. So thank you for that.
Cool. Oh, that's very nice to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so anyway, you're also my go-to guy on Afghanistan. And everybody knows is listening to this that Scott wrote a book I'm looking at it right now, Fool's Errand, and you should read it. You should get it. And Anyway, we'll just say that. You have the audio version now too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you have that option for people like my sons who now listen to books. I do too
Now
sometimes.
it's narrated by me too.
Yeah. You know what? That's really good because sometimes these books, I have an Audible. I like my Audible books, but in Bakovich, for example, he narrates the intro, and then he has some other guy do the book, and I'm like, man, I really would have loved to have heard it in the author's voice. I wish more authors would self-narrate it. Scott, I'm glad you did.
It
So
was such a pain, I'm telling you, man.
was it?
I can
It's
see why they don't want to. It's really difficult.
uh, well, I'm glad you did anyway. So anyway, let's play Trump's clip on Afghanistan, which is also very telling, I think. I'm going to play that.
Mr. President,
Yeah, go ahead, Afghanistan.
in Afghanistan, you have one ISIS in Syria, but in Afghanistan, Taliban is getting ground. And you mentioned India about it. What role do you want India to play?
Well, I think India should be involved in Afghanistan. I mean, I'll give you an example. You can talk about our generals. I gave our generals all the money they wanted. They didn't do such a great job in Afghanistan. They've been fighting in Afghanistan for 19 years. General Mattis thanked me profusely for getting him $700 billion. He couldn't believe it. General Mattis thanked me even more the following year when I got him $716 billion. He couldn't believe it because our military was depleted. Now we're rebuilding our military. We're getting, in fact, Pat was very responsible for a lot of the orders for the new F-35 fighter jets and F-18s and all of the things we're doing, including ships and missiles and everything. But General Mattis was so thrilled. But what's he done for me? How has he done in Afghanistan? Not too good. Not too good. I'm not happy with what he's done in Afghanistan, and I shouldn't be happy. But he was very happy. He was very thankful when I got him $700 billion, and then the following year, $716 billion. So, I mean, I wish him well. I hope he does well. But as you know, President Obama fired him, and essentially so did I. I want results.
So India is going to be more security related, or?
We're going to do something that's right. We are talking to the Taliban. We're talking to a lot of different people. But here's the thing, because you mentioned India. India is there. Russia is there. Russia used to be the Soviet Union. Afghanistan made it Russia because they went bankrupt fighting in Afghanistan, Russia. So you take a look at other countries. Pakistan is there. They should be fighting. But Russia should be fighting. The reason Russia was in Afghanistan was because terrorists were going into Russia. They were right to be there. The problem is it was a tough fight. And literally they went bankrupt. They went into being called Russia again as opposed to the Soviet Union. You know, a lot of these places you're reading about now are no longer part of Russia because of Afghanistan. But why isn't Russia there? Why isn't India there? Why isn't Pakistan there? Why are we there? We're 6,000 miles away. But I don't mind. We want to help our people. We want to help other nations. You do have terrorists, mostly Taliban, but ISIS. I mean, I'll give you an example. So Taliban is our enemy. ISIS is our enemy. We have an area that I brought up with our generals 4 or 5 weeks ago where Taliban is here, ISIS is here, and they're fighting each other. I said, why don't you let them fight? Why are we getting in the middle of it? I said, let them fight. They're both our enemies. Let them fight. Sir, we want to do it. They go in and they end up fighting both of them. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I think I would have been a good general, but who knows? But you know what? These are two enemies that are fighting against each other, and we end up going in and fighting. And what are we doing? But I say this, India, great relationship with Prime Minister Modi. He's a great gentleman, a great man, and he's done a fantastic job. He's brought the country together. India, Russia, you look at some of the satellite countries that are extremely wealthy with oil surrounding. I mean, I spoke to some of them. I said to a certain country, very rich country, what would you do if the United States pulled out? Oh, we'd be taken over by the Taliban and terrorists. I said, then why are you charging us when we have to use your country to send product through? Why are you charging us when we send airplanes over your country? We're doing the job for you. Why are you charging us? He said to me, very great gentleman, smart, he said to me, well, nobody ever asked me not to. I said, I'm asking you not to. He said, we will not charge you. And I'm talking about millions and millions of dollars. Flights over his country. But I say to him, what would happen if we weren't here? And he looks at me and he goes, we would be overrun. We could not defend ourselves. And yet he charges us, but he doesn't charge us anymore.
So there's just one more clip I want to play just for a little comic relief where he talks about Modi and Afghanistan.
When a country sends us 200 soldiers to Iraq or sends us 100 soldiers from a big country to Syria or to Afghanistan, and then they tell me 100 times, oh, we sent you soldiers, we sent you soldiers. And that's 1/100th of the money that they're taking advantage of. They're just doing that to make me happy or to make past presidents happy. I've heard past presidents, well, they're involved in the Afghanistan war because they sent us 100 soldiers. And yet it's costing us billions and billions of dollars. I mean, I could give you an example where I get along very well with India and Prime Minister Modi, but he's constantly telling me he built a library in Afghanistan. Okay, a library. That's like, you know what that is? That's like 5 hours of what we spend. And he tells it, and he's very smart. And we're supposed to say, oh, thank you for the library. I don't know who's using it in Afghanistan, but one of those things. But I don't like advantage of what other countries have done for the last long period of time is give us some soldiers and then talk about it like it's the end of the world, and we're subsidizing their militaries by billions and billions and billions of dollars, many, many, many times what those soldiers cost that country.
Did you hear about?
Anyway, that last part with Modi, he just takes the whole coalition thing, he blows that out of the water. But back to the Afghanistan clip. Now, you're probably pulling your hair out with his explanation of the Soviet Union and Afghanistan there.
Oh, no, I love it. I mean, just on that point, I'm so glad I quit Twitter, but I read an article that was full of a bunch of collected tweets about this. I actually wrote up a little blog entry. There's all this news coverage. It's so dishonest. It really is like Operation Mockingbird kind of thing, where in that whole kind of, it's a little bit disjointed. He's not the most eloquent man speaking about this stuff, you know? But there's one sentence in there where he was bluffing. He didn't know why Russia invaded Afghanistan in 1979. And so he goes, well, you know, they had terrorist attacks, and so they had to go in there. All the headlines go, oh, Donald Trump justifies the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Can you believe it? He's such a traitor. Oh, he loves Russia so much. Blah, 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 blah. Really? I mean, it was USA Today. That was the headline.
I saw that. They really grabbed onto that, yeah.
But in fact, that was the one essentially filler sentence in that paragraph where he was clearly bluffing. He didn't know what happened in 79. But that didn't matter. It had nothing to do with the rest of the paragraph. And you could see why they would be desperate to deny that he was right. You know, he calls the Soviet Union Russia and Russia the Soviet Union, and it's a little bit confusing the way he calls it. But all he's saying is exactly the truth. And by the way, has been the narrative of the Ronald Reaganites and, in fact, the American Empire-ites this whole time. That Reagan's brinksmanship in the 1980s on nuclear weapons spending and on luring continuing the Jimmy Carter policy of giving the Soviets their own Vietnam War in Afghanistan, which meant a no-win, impossible quagmire by American Operation Cyclone, CIA, Saudi, and Pakistani support for the other side to bog them down and bleed them to bankruptcy, as Osama bin Laden would put it. Yeah.
Brzezinski admits this.
Well, they bragged about it. I mean, this was, this was their great victory. It destroyed, and it's true, right? The Soviet war in Afghanistan, which was a brutal, virtually genocidal war. They killed 1 million people there. It was absolute horror show of a war there, and it cost the Soviets far more than they could afford. And Reagan actually cleverly worked out, or his people worked out, a clever form of economic war against them too, in getting the Saudis to vastly overproduce and drive the global price of oil way, way down, which really hurt the Soviets, who were oil exporters, and was one of their only ways of making money in the world was, of course, selling a commodity on the global capitalist market was the only way that they could survive at all. So that really helped to bankrupt them too. So all he's referring to is, one, true, and two, is the entire narrative of the entire empire ever since that time, right? It's not like he's trying to tell you a secret truth here. This is the Americans' great victory over the Soviets in the Cold War, and Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan has been part of that narrative this entire time, and correctly so. And then, but most importantly, then he's saying that the lesson here is that we should not make that same mistake.
Yes.
He doesn't even know the phrase, give them their own Vietnam or any of that. But he's just saying, why would we give ourselves our own Afghanistan if that's the thing that destroyed the Soviet Union? And what he says is, it used to be this, or, essentially what he's saying is, it used to be the Soviet Union. Now it's merely Russia, because they lost their entire empire because they got bogged down in this sandpit. And so we should stop. And so, of course, that's why all the media said, oh, look, he loves the Soviet Union even as he loves Russia so much. He even loves it when the USSR invaded Afghanistan 40 years ago now, which is just complete nonsense, right? Had nothing to do with it. That was just the one part of that statement where he was bluffing because he didn't know what to say about what had started the war back then. But so what? Had nothing to do with it. And of course, he's right. And then, but here's what's most important, I think. Well, maybe it's not most important. Maybe this is just kind of a sidebar, but an interesting one is that this was the point of the September 11th attack in the first place. It was not to make America turn and run. It was to make America so mad that it would do something stupid, like invade Afghanistan and stay there. That was the plan. They said it over and over again before the war. Bin Laden was interviewed by CNN, by Robert Fisk from The Independent, CNN multiple times. Peter Arnett and Peter Bergen both interviewed him. John Miller from ABC News, who later became an FBI agent on the case, interviewed him. He was interviewed by Abdelbari Atwan from the Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper in London, the great Palestinian reporter there. And he said over and over and over again, the goal is to lure the Americans into a war of attrition here where we can reach them, where we can bog them down, bleed them to bankruptcy in ultimate humiliating defeat like the Soviet Union, and drive them out of the Middle East entirely. They would break the American empire on the rocks of Afghanistan, and then it would finally leave them alone once and for all on the long game. And so this was the whole point, to provoke that overreaction. Now, of course, as Michael Scheuer, the former chief of the bin Laden unit at the CIA, has said, and numerous others, that going to Iraq and then, oh my God, Yemen, Libya, Syria, are you kidding me? This is just an entire pile of Christmas presents for Osama bin Laden. And especially the attacks on the, supposed Iranian Shiite axis of power over there. Can you imagine a regime change in Iran against the Shiite regime there? What that would have meant to Osama bin Laden if he could have gotten the Americans, if he could have given the Americans the writ, not just to get rid of Saddam and Saleh and Gaddafi and half of Assad or any, something there. But if he could get America, if he could have given America the excuse to get rid of the Ayatollah in Persia, holy man, talk about America has been absolutely made the agent of Al-Qaeda this whole time. I mean, people would say, the 9/11 truthers would say, who benefits from 9/11? And the answer is Al-Qaeda benefits. This is perfect. They made servants out of the American people and the American military. They made George Bush their dog on a leash. Their poodle, as the British called Tony Blair about George, his relationship with Bush. And it's not, I don't mean to say, people always take this wrong. Like, I mean that, oh, George Bush is so stupid that somehow that makes him innocent. That's not true. The plan was to give George Bush a Reichstag fire to cynically exploit like bin Laden knew he would. That makes Bush the worst criminal in the world. That makes Bush exactly as bad as bin Laden for deliberately taking the bait, for using the 9/11 crisis as an excuse to do what they wanted, to get rid of to first of all invade Afghanistan and try to have things their way there, but also to carry on with the rest of these wars under the excuse of protecting Americans from terrorism. That was, is absolutely the most cynical, murderous, criminal, campaign from the very get-go on the American side. But that's what bin Laden was counting on. That Bush and Cheney are going to be puppets on his string because they are the sick, evil, cynical exploiters that he knew them to be. So Donald Trump is far more right than he knows.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing that he was focused on, I think, is the fact that it bankrupted, and as you said, they lost their empire. And that's the lesson he took from it, regardless of the other aspects of the story that he, clearly doesn't understand. But the other thing,
it's ridiculous to see the way that they attacked him for that. And
yeah,
you know what? Just a week before, I just found this Googling around, that a week before he said he wants to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, the Washington Post was attacking him for not having any good excuses for why we're still in Afghanistan.
Are you kidding me?
As long as they're attacking him, they're attacking him. They don't care. It's the most dishonest thing in the world.
Yeah, it doesn't have to make any sense. Yeah, they just thought they could get him on that, which is, that's clearly the mission right now, is just take him out of office. But the other thing that he did, I was surprised, and I did wonder, and I think a lot of people wondered, he was, during his campaign and early in his first couple of years, he was really always bragging about the generals. He loved the generals, and the generals. And everybody kind of wondered when he was going to turn. Actually, they wondered two things. When's he going to turn on the generals, and when's he going to turn on Netanyahu? Those are the two speculations I saw a lot of anyway.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Isn't it great? I mean, this is part of the Bob Woodward book, too, is that he would just sit there screaming at the generals. And, I imagine that that's a bit hyperbolic that he would get that angry. But I think it's a great reassertion of civilian supremacy over the military. And, it almost seems intelligent by him that he deliberately, as I was saying before, reduced the rules of engagement and delegated authority. In other words, to say, hey, look at me. No one's going to accuse me of being LBJ or Barack Obama and hamstringing these guys and preventing them from doing what they have to do. I told them, this is your mission. You go out there and do this, which leaves him, set up perfect for a couple of years later to say, and they haven't come through.
Says I gave them everything.
But the thing is, I don't care actually what they're talking about, but just the whole tone of voice that the generals said this and the generals aren't doing very good at that's exactly how generals are to be spoken of. Enough of this garbage where these are our gods on Mount Olympus and wow, they get up at 5 a.m. Yeah, so do hundreds of millions of people every day get up and go to work. Give me a break. Like that makes them these supermen who we must defer to. I mean, their job is, I guess, conceiving strategy, but really, mostly it should be explaining the material limitations on the kind of strategies that civilians come up with. Their real job is implementing strategies and coming up with the best tactics to make those strategies, be accomplished. They're not supposed to be in charge of foreign policy. They're supposed to be in charge of the military instrument. America is supposed to be ruled by elected civilians, if anyone at all. And this whole thing and they try to make this the crisis. Trump isn't even doing what his generals say. Good. What he ought to do is be screaming at them, get down and give me 50 push-ups on TV in front of their kids. and let them know that they're not the bosses around here. Enough of this. You know, maybe Obama really was just half a man, but that's not the way it works anymore. Should be the narrative. Absolutely. These men are servants, public servants of the civilian power, period.
Yeah, and this surprised me, I have to say. I did not think that he was going to say, you know, I gave Mattis everything he asked for, and what's he done for me? You know, we're still losing the war. I really didn't expect that to come from him.
Mm-hmm. And he said generals, plural, meaning General Nicholson, too, who, you know, they kept, and then he fired, and now he's got this new guy, Scott, in there who's another special operations guy.
Yeah, I mean, they're just 1-year caretakers at this point. Right. Of a war nobody expects.
And I guess he was probably throwing McMaster in there too, because McMaster stayed to implement that war for a good, 8 months or so before he left. So, and I just think that's absolutely the right take. And, people were joking in my little Reddit chat room that I have that, man, is this guy listening to the Scott Horton show? This is what I keep telling him to do, is just attack the right from the right and just talk about how expensive it is and how it's not working out and how it's the fault of everybody else. And see, in my book, I say he should just throw Bush and Obama under the bus completely, right? He ain't married to Bill Clinton. He ain't the brother of George Bush. He wasn't a secretary under Obama or any of this. None of this is his fault. So you should just blame it all on them. But you know what? 2 years into it, it's fine because it's a year and a half into the escalation. And so now he can just add one more sentence to the narrative, which is, you know what? Bush and Obama blew it. They built a government that can't stand on its own, that the people of Afghanistan don't support, certainly not enough to keep it up. So it's a fool's errand to stay there on this mission that doesn't work. But then you know what? My generals, when I came in, said, give us one last chance. And so I did. And now it's been a year and a half, and Mattis and McMaster got their way. They're supposedly the best of the best, and they couldn't do it either. And so now I'm going to do the right thing, which is what I wanted to do all along. Perfect. It's perfect. And the American people will support him. We ran a poll at antiwar.com. Not that we did the poll, but we ran the link to the article about it, where after, 2 weeks straight of them slamming Trump as this is the most irresponsible thing he's ever done is order troops out of Syria and say he's going to order them out of Afghanistan. He actually hasn't yet. That 52% of the American people still support him on it. He has, relatively low approval rating. I don't know exactly what his overall approval rating is now, but I know it's below 50%.
Right.
But 52% support him on this. And that's after this massive propaganda campaign about this is the worst thing he's ever done. And so that is, to me, really telling. And,
yeah, it is.
And I think if he would, continue to do those things where he speaks right into the camera to the American people, puts that out on Twitter, and especially if he rallies the military, like, hey, families of military guys, you want your guys coming home yet or not? What are we doing here? They will support him. Maybe the officers won't. I don't know. Maybe the officers will too. I mean, look at Douglas McGregor. He speaks for himself, but he speaks for a lot of guys who are sick and tired of this too. He does.
Yeah. And, one of the most incredibly stupid mistakes the Democrats could possibly have done, it was a knee-jerk reaction, was to oppose, the announcement of pulling out of Syria right before Christmas. I mean, how could you possibly make a political mistake like that? But they did, and they all just ran like a herd right off the cliff on that one, man. I couldn't even believe it.
I know. It's crazy to watch. But you know what? I think in the very same Hillary Clinton-ite way, they're completely tone deaf to how horrible and evil they sound and how out of touch and how outdated their positions are. I mean, MSNBC and CNN just completely co-opting 2000s era Fox News jingoism. It just doesn't play that well. Trying to tell people in Nebraska that you hate and fear Russia all day. It's just, I really don't. I don't know. And especially the Democrats doing it, as you and I know, the center-left Democratic Party types are absolutely horrible on every foreign policy, and they have been. And that's what we hate about them so much, especially. But regular rank-and-file Democratic voters, they just don't believe in that stuff. Not that much. I mean, they can be made to look the other way if it's Obama doing it or something like that. But It's one of the reasons they stayed home they didn't vote for Trump, but they stayed home rather than turn out to support Hillary Clinton. It's because they just don't believe in that stuff. And so, yeah, I'm just repeating myself now. But I think it's great politics for Trump to keep ending wars and to make these Democrats keep spinning out like you're talking about and keep attacking him from the right in the most insane ways. No matter how many troops' lives it takes, we must keep Iran out of Syria, is the Democratic Party's rallying cry. Really? Do it. Dare you.
Right before Christmas, too. The whole image of bringing the troops home for Christmas, it's as old as the hills, and yet they
I saw a great meme where it's the military father, military husband comes and surprises his wife at work. And she, dies crying and hugging him and stuff. And then it says, "This is exactly what Russia wants."
My God.
Which is, they're mocking the Russiagate guys. That, this is the position that they're in now, right? Arguing against bringing the troops home makes them the worst of all of us.
I know. It's crazy.
Arguing for keeping these wars makes them the worst of all. If they think Trump's bad, they're worse than him on the worst thing in the world. How do they explain that?
Yeah, and it just reinforces my belief that foreign policy played a huge role in electing him, even though that goes against conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom is foreign policy is not a major doesn't play a major role in any presidential election. I just don't believe that. I don't believe it at all.
Well, on the Netanyahu question, man, I'm here to say if he goes ahead and throws, the Israel first foreign policy under the bus as well, in terms of especially Iran, like I really don't care what Likud says. I want to go make a deal with the Ayatollah and have this kind of peace. I mean, think about it. There ain't that many rogue states in the world. And unlike Dick Cheney's nonsense, they can all easily be dealt with. We're seeing this going on in Korea right now. They could have done the same thing with his father, with Kim Jong-il. Bush could have continued the agreed framework deal from the Clinton years, and we could have had a peaceful relationship, end to the conflict on the Korean Peninsula all this time. And we can make friends with the Ayatollah and with Bashar al-Assad, and then that's pretty much it. There's no one out there that threatens America's interests. Russia and China are big enough to be independent from us, but they don't threaten us. They're not even frenemies. They should just be friends. They're not even, really rivals. And almost all of the worst stuff that China's doing is in reaction to American attempted imperial hegemony in the first place. Blame Hillary Clinton and her pivot to Asia policy, if you want to, even look at that. I mean, he could really turn this whole thing around and completely deflate support for the Democrats if he would just appoint the right handful of guys and do the things, not that he believes in, but stop doing the things he doesn't believe in, and that'd be good enough,
Yeah, I mean, he on the phone call with Erdogan, he had John Bolton right next to him, and he makes this decision to pull out of Syria with John Bolton standing next to him. Now, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what that says, but I think it says Bolton has gotten through, certainly poisoned his thoughts on Iran, but I mean, it hasn't
I don't trust
really.
That guy. He's always said, why are we even bothering with Assad? The enemy is the Ayatollah. That's the only reason we're bothering with Assad is because he's an ally of the Ayatollah. But so why don't we just go after, strike the root? And that's always been his position. So I think that I'm suspicious of that. In fact, the count I read was that Trump said, can we get him out in a week or something like that in a couple of weeks? And that Bolton said, yes.
Yeah.
And then that was it. So I think that was the Mark Perry piece in the American Conservative about it. But, that makes me worry that he's playing the long game here and trying to really engineer a conflict with Iran. But I really don't think Trump wants a conflict with Iran. And one could be engineered by the Israelis and the neocons in the worst case scenario, but I don't really think that's in the cards.
Yeah, it's always been his Achilles heel is, anti-Iran mania. But listen, I kept you for a long time. But do you have time to talk about William Atkin's memo to NBC, because it ties right in with what we're talking about right now?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. I know Bill Atkin. I've interviewed him a couple of times. But
really?
For whatever reason, I feel like I know him pretty well. Maybe I just read so much of him. I've only interviewed him, I think, once or twice. I think maybe we had like a long argument back and forth in the email one day or something where it was friendly enough. I don't know. For some reason, I feel like I know the guy better than I really do, I guess. But I really like him. And he's not good on everything. Like at one point, I think he recommended strikes in response to one of these fake gas attacks. That could be a false accusation. I forget which thing it was, but he's had some deviations, but he's like 95% great. And, you know, he wrote all that stuff about the deep state for the Washington Post. I like that when people go, there's no deep state. Oh, really? You ought to read the Washington Post report about how they control the Washington Post and everybody else. You know, the Top Secret America it was called. And they wrote a book about it, him and Dana Priest. And but anyway, he's a really good guy. And so he explains he resigned from NBC and MSNBC as a technical advisor and a reporter. And I'm not exactly sure what, you know, the specific role he's been playing. But what he talks a lot about in the essay and in the email that he wrote was that he's, you know, one of his jobs, even going back to the Bush years, was really as like an in-house teacher for the journalists. So that, you know, they understood the baseline of what we really know about Saddam's weapons, for example. And he said that he had tried to tell them back then that he didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, and they wouldn't listen to him back then. They didn't want to hear it. But then he, you know, really goes on about just what we're talking about the liberal media going directly to the nth degree in the tank for the national security state to protect from the elected president who they view as such a uncouth and such a right-wing, you know, deviation from what they want to see, such a repudiation of the post-Cold War foreign policy establishment and their policies that it's, you know, really created this insane circumstance where they are, as he puts it, almost beyond critique now. They're held to a higher esteem than ever before even, and how it just twists everything. Like we're talking about, if Trump wants out of Syria, then we love staying in Syria. Trump wants out of Afghanistan, that's the most reckless thing in the world. He's going to turn the whole place over to Putin or whatever it is. And that's essentially what he's complaining about is, you know, that level of conformity with this narrative and how he just doesn't have a place there. He's an expert on things that are true. He doesn't want to participate in the Trump circus, and they have no use for, you know, the reality that he's trying to get across. And he talks about, he specifically says, like, oh, we're supposed to just uncritically adulate the CIA and the FBI now? When this is, come on, this isn't a left wing or a right wing or libertarian wing or a rich or a poor or a black or a white or a conspiracy theory or anything else. This is just straight grown-up adult human being history of the world, is that the FBI is not so benevolent a force. They commit a lot of crimes against a lot of good people, and they always have. And let's not just sit here and pretend that these guys are above reproach, because that'd be crazy. And if that's how it's going to be at NBC, then see you later. And he said he's going back to writing novels. So
yeah, I saw
we'll
that.
miss him.
That one paragraph is worth reading. He says, "For me, I realized how out of step I was when I looked at Trump's various bumbling intuitions, his desire to improve relations with Russia, to denuclearize North Korea, to get out of the Middle East, to question why we're fighting in Africa, even in his attacks on the intelligence community and the FBI. Of course he's an ignorant and incompetent imposter, and yet I'm alarmed at how quick NBC is to mechanically argue to the contrary, to be in favor of policies that just spell out more conflict and more war. Really? We shouldn't get out of Syria? We shouldn't go for the bold move of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula? Even on Russia, even though we should be concerned about the brittleness of our democracy, that it's so vulnerable to manipulation, do we really yearn for the Cold War? And don't even get me started on the FBI. What? We now lionize this historically destructive institution? See, really, it looks to me like that reaction to pulling out of Syria might have been the last straw for him. I mean, I don't know, but he kind of makes it sound that way.
Well, and rightly so. I mean,
he also mentions a few things that we were talking about. First of all, what just sort of gets under his skin and he can't live with is the fact that he says increasing gaggles of those who seem to accept that a state of perpetual war was a necessity. And then he also mentions, and I don't think I've heard it this way before, he says NBC, like the rest of the news media, could no longer keep up with the world. So he talks about sort of what's influencing this whole thing, these new kinds of wars when there were no real fronts and no actual measures of success. To me, there's also a larger problem. Though they produce nothing that resembles actual safety and security. And then he says this part, no great wartime leaders or visionaries are emerging. Beloved perfume princes, I'm just doing excerpts here. Beloved perfume princes in the form of the Petreuses and the West Clarks, or the so-called warrior monks like Mattis and McMaster. We've had more than a generation of national security leaders who sadly and fraudulently have done little of consequence. So he nails it. I mean, he doesn't just give some sort of superficial reasons. He goes to the core of it, which is what struck me so much. And the fact, frankly, that it was anyone from NBC. I mean, that was a shocker.
Well, I really liked what he says about how they haven't even really tried to explain the wars. They can't. They don't understand, and so it's just not their beat. They just,
That's the point you were making, is that some of the things that Trump is saying and why I'm so optimistic, cautiously optimistic, some of the things he threw out yesterday in that cabinet meeting, like you said, are charges that cannot be countered. And there's more than
in
one.
fact, he said Iran hates Russia. Iran hates ISIS. They hate ISIS even more than we hate ISIS.
Yeah.
Which is the media has been saying in a very Cheneyite way, the big beneficiaries here are Assad, meaning the government of Syria. Yeah, they're the beneficiary if we leave Syria. Big deal. They go, but the big beneficiaries are Assad, Iran, Russia, and ISIS, as though they're all on the same side, and that's who we're fighting against there, when that is not the story of the war in Syria at all. And so Trump was really confronting that bogus narrative and was saying Iran is there to kill ISIS. If we leave, ISIS has, enough problems on their hands. He could have mentioned America's friends. The Shiite militias of Iraq are also there working with Hezbollah and Iran and Russia to crush the Islamic State that Obama built for them. So,
I mean, and he goes after two generals this week. These vaunted men who are put on pedestals. And he goes after Mattis. He says, he couldn't win the war in Afghanistan. I gave him everything. He didn't do it. And then on Twitter, he went after Stanley McChrystal, too, who, attacked Trump. And in fact, I was shocked at he called him a dog. He said Obama fired him like a dog, and that the only thing he's known for is, a big dumb mouth. So that's two generals in 1 week. I mean, you're not allowed to do that, right?
I love that too, because, Stanley McChrystal is an absolute fraud. Him and David Petraeus they both knew they couldn't win that war in Afghanistan. And all they were doing, as they admitted, was adding time to the Washington clock so they could just not lose the war on their watch. Let it be somebody else's fault. And now here it is, when somebody else's fault time's up, and here they are attacking him for doing what they left him in the position of having no choice but to do. The war they lost. And it's too bad Trump doesn't know more about it, because, he knows about McChrystal being fired for insubordination. But, he could have made some really funny jokes there about, Obama fired him for insubordination, but what he was really guilty of was losing the war there. Because that would be the truth. And, especially David Petraeus is a worse fraud than McChrystal, but both of them are guilty of lying the American people into war, essentially, into doubling the Afghan war. And we could take them both to the woodshed for their role in the Iraq War, too, as well, but that's separate. But
Yep. All right.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I'm all on the Obama surge now. I better stop.
No, I keep interrupting you. I apologize. I'm just afraid.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
thinking-
no, it's great. Hey, listen, but yeah, no, it goes back to what you were saying about before about criticizing the generals on all of this. I think that's like a great advent. Just like I was saying about Trump saying support the troops, bring them home, and I guess Lindsey Graham doesn't care about them that much and that kind of thing. I think this is another one of those, really productive narratives.
Yeah, and the whole thing about, I didn't get us into Syria. I mean, like, I don't know. Of course, I'm always cautious in any optimism with this guy because he's chosen to walk things back before. He's been pressured to walk things back. It sounds like this time he's not going to walk things back, but, I don't know what's going to happen between now and the time to pull out. I don't know. It looks like maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and I, up until recently didn't think he was going to be able to do it. I just hope he can.
I sure hope that the next time we talk about this, that Tom Cotton isn't the Secretary of Defense and we're at war with Iran. But you know what? I really, I'm very hopeful about this Jim Webb thing. I know that they're seriously considering it, and I know that Jim Webb doesn't believe in this garbage. I don't know exactly what he would do about it. I'm not saying he's Ron Paul, but I know he does not believe in this terror war at all. So I think, what's the cliche again, where personnel is policy? That's the deal. So if he makes a few good choices on hires here in the near term, that could make all the difference. I guess that's what is going to make the difference, and we'll see sooner than later, probably.
And if Congress doesn't impeach him and Senate doesn't vote him out in the meantime,
Nah, they won't. The Republicans still have a majority in the Senate, and they would need a super majority, 2/3, to remove him. And, well, I don't know. I guess I can't completely rule it out, but I don't even think, like, what could be the worst possible thing in the Mueller report? That, Roger Stone did something that, I mean, and what could Stone have even done? What could be the worst thing that Stone could have done that would get Trump removed from power? I don't think so.
That's been my opinion mostly, but the power of the war party is pretty awesome, but it looks like, if you just pull a few threads, that everyone else was terrified to pull these threads because they knew that they would have that entire machine coming after them. But, what more are they going to do now to Trump, particularly if he's got a lot of support among the rank and file and, let's say, mid-level officers? I'm not sure what they have. I don't know what there's a term for it. Not quite paper tiger, but I mean, their narrative is not that hard to poke holes in, and he's really doing that.
Right.
So
we'll know we won when he says that all the warmongers, they're the ones who gave Iraq to Iran's friends in the first place. And they're the reason that Iran is in Syria helping Assad, is to protect against the Obama policy that they all supported. So I don't want to hear it. That will be when we know he's really learned who's who over there and has decided to use these kooks' mistakes against them in the worst way.
And when he was talking about Afghanistan, you can see that he's asking those basic questions. Those really basic questions that
and he's learning, right? He is learning. He's saying, essentially what he was saying there is what we're doing is we're helping Iran and Russia's friends there. Why are we doing that?
And the same thing with Afghanistan. He's saying, why don't we just let ISIS and Taliban fight each other? Okay, super simplified. But he is asking.
I like where he goes, I don't know if I would have made a good general, but I think I would have.
Oh, that was hilarious.
That was when he was saying let Taliban and ISIS fight. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I did too.
He's at least funny. You got to give him that.
I did get a couple of really good laughs. It's gallows humor, of course, but yeah, I did get a few really good laughs out of that. So, anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Oh, I don't know. I'm writing a new book. It'll be still a few months, but it's going to be about all the terror wars. And so that should be fun.
When, a few months, you think it'll be out? Or you'll be finished writing?
I sure hope that I can get it done. Well, you know what? If I'm honest and I'm comparing it on the timeline to where I was on Fool's Errand at this time in 2017, And I guess I'll be lucky if I get it done by August. And so, I decided I'm going to do all of my interviews on Fridays only. And I'm going to write 4 days a week or 5 days a week, really, including Saturdays. And just do my interviews all day on Friday. And try to really double and triple down and work really hard on getting this book finished as fast as I can. At least I know a little bit more about how to do it now. So that's giving me an edge on going a little bit faster. But the book is about all of the wars. So I still have a lot of books to read and a lot of, Yeah. I got a rough draft done. I mean, I'm halfway done, but.
That's great. I can't wait for it. And tell people how they can support you.
Check out my Patreon. At scotthorton.org/donate is all that stuff there. So my book is Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. That's on Amazon. And I do a show. People can subscribe to the podcast. I've done 4,880 something interviews. They're all there at scotthorton.org for free. Going back to 2003 there for you. And then I'm the opinion editor at antiwar.com. So read the viewpoints there and all the top news at antiwar.com every day. The great Jason Ditz and a lot of other great people there. And then I run the Libertarian Institute. If people are individualist types in your crowd, you might check us out at libertarianinstitute.org. That's me and Sheldon Richmond there. And what other jobs do I have? I think that's pretty much it. scotthorton.org for the show if people want to sign up for the podcast there. It's probably the biggest deal. Oh, and I'm on the radio in Los Angeles on Sunday mornings on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, the Pacifica station there.
I don't know how you do it, Scott. It's amazing, but I don't know what I'd do without you. I've learned so much from your interviews and your talks. I like the way you can boil things down. And, another thing for people to check out is Scott's various talks at events where he, in an hour, let's say, really kind of boils everything down in a way that I don't know anybody else can do it better, really.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I do have a bunch of speeches on YouTube. In fact, there's a page on scotthorton.org where I have links to all those speeches I've given, especially in the last year or a year and a half or so since the book came out. But going back actually to, 2007 or something.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And
cool. Thank you.
All right.
Great to talk to you again.
You too.
Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Scott Horton. Find his work at libertarianinstitute.org, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and patreon.com/Scott Horton Show. Find his book at foolserrand.us. The Around the Empire podcast is independent media. Your support is really important. Please pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or do one-time donations via PayPal, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. You can find these links on our website at aroundtheempire.com. The syndicated audio podcast has been the main focus for Around the Empire and where we have the most traffic. We're on most podcast apps like iTunes, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, all those. Please subscribe to us there. And if you like us, click some stars for a good review. It helps. I'd like to do some improvements and add some new kinds of content this year, which will require new equipment and hiring of some creative freelancers and such. For instance, I plan to add some video content, live stream and otherwise. And for this, we'll also need more subscribers on YouTube to earn revenue. You can find the link for our YouTube channel in the show notes. And just hit this red subscribe button. It's free. It won't bother you with notifications unless you turn them on with the bell icon. And please use the thumbs up icon to like the individual videos when you listen to them. Also, follow us on Twitter at Around the Empire. See you next time. Take care, everyone.